how do you integrate multiple words together? How do you understand the meaning of multiple words together? How do you know that a dog biting a man is very different from a man biting a dog? If you think about your first language, you probably don't get any clues from that. You don't remember what it was like. You mysteriously figured it all out as a baby. You probably do remember, though, that at some point, maybe in elementary school, maybe in high school, you were taught the grammar of that language. You had to memorize abstract terms like subject or object, passive voice versus active voice. And all of these syntactic rules and abstract categories seemed very foreign to you, as if it wasn't a language that you already speak fluently and can understand very easily. So what is it that we do in our heads when we use language? To what extent do we use those abstract categories and syntactic rules? This is a matter of debate. Generative linguistics suggests that every time you speak, you compute these abstract structures and follow strict rules. On this approach, language is mainly an internal cognitive capacity of ours, and we're born with innate biases that guide us from the first time we hear language to look for certain generalizations, to group together words and phrases into categories not necessarily based on meaning, and to derive systematic rules about how items of those categories can be put together. This kind of abstract knowledge allows us to recognize that a sentence is formally okay, that it's grammatical, even if its meaning doesn't make any sense. We can even recognize that a collection of made-up words is English, like in this excerpt from Alice in Wonderland. This also allows us to come up with novel ways of saying things. We know the rules of verbal morphology, so we can make anything into a verb now. The alternative is a usage-based approach to linguistics. On this approach, we learn language by mapping words and sentences directly to meaning, without generating an internal system of rules. There are no innate biases, just monitoring of how often and in which context each phrase occurs. This is based on the idea that language is mainly a means to an end, that it's a form of communication. We intuitively feel the use of this surface mapping when we encounter fixed expressions, like take a rainy check, meaning to postpone. Such idioms, but also slang and memes, often have meanings that isn't exactly a sum of all of the phrase's parts. You can't break down throw shade into its synonyms, toss and shadow, and get the meaning of talk disrespectfully. If this feels unintuitive for you, just try to take an expression from one language you know and translate it to another language you know. It would suddenly sound very funny. This type of learning is also how ChatGPT works. It has a very big database, and it learns words and which words usually go together based on counting occurrences without any rule-based biases. These two approaches seem as opposites, but we already see that we need a bit of both. We need some system to memorize known fixed expressions, and we also need some system that can handle completely novel utterances. Therefore, in my Azrieli project, I try to bridge the gap between the two. The way I address this question of what we do in our heads is by examining what people expect a sentence to be like, how they think it would unfold. Imagine you had only the first couple of words of this sentence and you had to guess the next word. You could use your rule-based system to predict that the next word would be of the abstract category verb. But you could also base your predictions on more fine-grained knowledge of which specific verbs are likely. There's a lot of evidence that we use this kind of knowledge because if we have an infrequent verb, or a verb which is frequent but is not very likely in this context, you take longer to read the sentence. So how does this item-specific experience work? Does it mean we have to remember the exact sentences that we heard before or read before? Do we count the number of occurrences for each word in our language? What if our memory isn't accurate enough for that? This is a challenge for the item-specific experience approach, which comes out of the usage-based grammars. If we use only item-specific experience, we also face another challenge. What if we have to predict the next word, and the sentence that we heard so far is pretty long, and we don't have any exact matches to it in our history, in our memory? We could shift strategies and stop trying to figure out what would come up next because we don't have history with that particular sentence. But I would like to propose that this is exactly where abstract syntactic categories can come in. If we have generative kind of system, as well as experience with language and specific utterances, we can generalize more easily without having a big set of memories for each linguistic utterance. If we have both systems, we can generate predictions not just based on the specific utterance that we have at the moment, but also based on other cases that have similar structural properties, even if those past sentences that we encountered have very different meanings from the current one. So instead of using the string, "what do we," as a prompt for our lexical prediction process, we would use all sentences in our memory that share a structural property, for example, including a WH word, like what, who, when. This would give us a bigger set of comparison cases. And this, on average, would help us overcome problems of limited experience and limited memory. We can analyze the elevated reading times that signal surprise, like we talked about, and see if they fit better with item-specific counts or with counts based on aggregation of abstractly similar sentences. In my lab, I can measure reading times for each word in a sentence with an accuracy of milliseconds, so a second divided by 1,000. And we do that with an eye tracker. So this is a sophisticated camera that records participants' eye movements, and it finds where exactly on the screen the participant is looking. We can tell where they are looking with a precision of 1 or 2 letters to each side. We can calculate exactly how much extra time people take to read words that are surprising versus words that are predictable. And we can compare the cost of surprise across sentences of similar and different structural properties. So together, examining closely probabilities of different phrases, and having fine-grained measures of what people do in real time when they read a sentence, this allows us to examine the contribution of abstract representations to our language comprehension. I hope this would open the door to more collaborations across subdisciplines of linguistics, because my hunch is that only together we can figure out the multifaceted nature of language. Thank you.